This is Joel, and in this video we'll try to build a simple playground, right, like a sandbox environment for OpenStack. Okay, since this is probably the first video I'm ever touching on OpenStack on the channel, probably let me spend a couple of minutes explaining what it is, right? It's a very simple topic actually, or the concept. Okay, so in the previous, or probably on the channel, you would have already encountered me playing around with some public clouds like AWS. Right? What did AWS bring to the table? They have huge amount of resources, right? They have what? CPUs, they've got memory, right? And all the other kinds of resources. I'm just going to take a couple of them here for example, right? But what they actually bring to the table is they have a lot of amount of resources. What they are doing is they are providing you a way, or basically an operating system, right, to access this, right? So as a result, you can jump onto the AWS console, right, and you can create what? You can create instances, right? You can create storage buckets, right? You can create VPC, you can play around with the network and so on, right? So AWS provides you that let's call it operating system to basically manage the huge amount of resources which they have. You can kind of like pay them, and they will in turn give you these instances, like leasing out the resources, right? So they have huge amount of resources, and they are providing you this cool manageability operating system using which you can provision those resources, right? What OpenStack is basically that, right? So whatever this blue color, what I've mentioned here, that's OpenStack, right? But it is free for you to use. It's openly available out there to use, right? So if you want to kind of, as you see this diagram here, right, and like they mentioned here, OpenStack is nothing but a cloud operating system, right? So if you yourself have a lot of, say, bare metal servers, right, or you have a bunch of VMs, containers, you want to provision containers, you have networking resources, you have storage resources, right, you can spin up your own cloud using OpenStack, right? Either it could be for private use. Maybe you have a data center inside your enterprise, and you have a bunch of these things, and you want to probably deploy some applications, and you're looking for a nice cloud way of deploying your application, right? Because cloud brings a lot of cool things to the table, right? Like the flexibility, the scalability, and so on. So if you want all of that, and rather than a traditional data center, you want to move to a SDN kind of an approach, then and if you want, in that case, it basically the very important requirement to have something like an OpenStack, which will do the orchestration, which will do the management, which will take care of all the resources, right, in a single GUI, right? So that's where we are headed with OpenStack, right? And if you probably scroll down, the other important thing is you can, let me just get rid of that. Yeah, so I think I've already got another screen open here. Basically nothing but this one, right? OpenStack components. So just like in AWS, you have all this different services providing you different kind of resources, right? You have the S3, you have the VPC, you have EC2, and so on, right? So different components which make up your AWS. Very similarly in OpenStack, you have different services, and some of the notable ones are these, right? You have very, very cool names they have. I think it's probably come up because, these names, I think they're called this way because OpenStack as a project, I think it debuted around 2010, right? And it was something which came out of NASA, I believe. It was a combination of, I think, NASA and Rackspace, right? It's like a marriage between these two projects, and that's how it came to the development community, right? And since then, every year people really OpenStack has been releasing new versions of it. I think the latest one is called Wallaby, if I'm not wrong, right? So yeah, that's about how OpenStack came into existence. But coming back to the services, just like in AWS, we have different services doing different things for you, like storage, the CPU, and so on. Very similarly in OpenStack as well, you've got very similar services. So here you can see we've got a compute service, and that's called as Nova, something which we'll use regularly, right? Container service called Xamarin. So there are different cool names, like you can see there's Cyborg, and from the storage side, we probably use a lot of Swift and Cinder. For the networking, right, we are I'm a fundamental network engineer, so Neutron is basically the service, where we'll be playing around with the IP pools, creating all of that, so that's the networking part, right? And then you have the shared services, you have the orchestration, the heat is another service. So very fun names you can see here, and it's very nicely documented as well. You can get to each of this service and see what it's doing. The identity service, right? Like you have identity management in AWS. Similarly, you have something called as Keystone here, right? But you need not know everything. You need not know all the services to start with. You just need to know that something like this exists. Right now, this video, like I said, it's not mainly targeted on OpenStack to go through like every single thing in OpenStack. Rather, it's about how to get a small setup up and running, right? So that you can play around with it. Because I think OpenStack, there's so much documentation, so much cool things, tutorials, all of that out there, right? You just need to figure out a way to bring up a small workstations or a small OpenStack development platform, right? So that you can play around with it, right? So that being said, let me go down to my third link, which is nothing but DevStack, right? You can again go down to this particular link here. I'll probably paste it in the description as well. So, or you can just Google for DevStack, right? Very, very common, right? So we are basically going to try to install DevStack, right? Basically this one. And I mean, the steps, all of that is pretty much given here, but still, sometimes, there are a few things here and there which we might do, different from here to get a more better experience, so that we can, build our lab or a sandbox in a more efficient way. Okay. That being said, what do we do next? Step number 1, right? We need a Linux. So what I'm doing here is, if you have a VirtualBox or VMware Fusion, probably you can do it on your Mac itself. I do have it, but then I like to keep my MacBook a little light without running a lot of resources on it. So I do have a Windows machine, right, in my lab. So what I'm going to do is, let me quickly bring that up. Give me 1 second. All right. So let me jump on to my Windows machine here, right? It's in the same network as my Mac. So I'm just doing RDP, right? Remote desktop. And this is my Windows workstation, right? So on this, I have your VMware workstation player, right? You can probably get the latest one, whichever is running. I think I have like a workstation 16. And what I'm going to do first is, let's go and install Ubuntu on this. So which Ubuntu I'm going to be using? So they recommend that DevStack has been recently tested in Ubuntu 20.04. So I went down to the Ubuntu 20.04 focal fossa, and I downloaded the server install image, right? So this one. So when you download that, you basically get a ISO. So we are going to install that, right? So let's say File, New Virtual Machine. And in the browse, right, I'm basically going to browse my 2004, right? You can also, I think, try 1804 if you want, but I'm going to go with the latest one because it's probably going to have all the fixes and all of that, right? Select that, go next, and let's give some name. So I'm going to say OpenStack here. So that's going to be my name, username. Let's also go with the password, which is going to be something which I can remember. All right, so there you go. I'm going to go with next. Again, I'm going to give the name as well as my the name as OpenStack, right? You can give whatever name you want. Let's I'll probably, we could change that. Let's call it oh, it's fine. OpenStack is fine, right? Let's go with next. There's already something which exists, so let me just change that to just the stack, right? It should be fine. You can give any name you want, right? Doesn't matter. So we'll go with next. I think you want a minimum space of 50 GB, right, for the hard drive. And we'll say that, store virtual disk as a single file. Let's not do the whole LVM and stuff, right? Let's keep everything in single file. Go next. You can customize it. So I'm going to probably give him 12 GB so that, I have a system with, I think, close to 16 GB. So I have close to 16 GB RAM, so I can go with like 12 GB, but I think it should work even with like 8 GB, right? So let's go to the processors. Probably I'm going to increase it to 4 processors. And also remember to probably enable the virtualization, right, because it will come handy, because what you're trying to do actually is spin up OpenStack inside a VM, which is nothing but nested virtualization. All right, sorry about that. Dog has been bugging me up. Okay, so enable virtualization, and what I'm going to do is for the network adapter, I'm going to go with bridged, so that it will get an IP in my existing network, right? I'm connected to a wireless network, so it'll basically get a IP in that space. So that being done, I'm going to close this and I'm going to say finish. So now it will actually start the installation of our Ubuntu, right? So within few seconds, it should actually give us some prompts to do some settings. Basically, let's see, that should come down any minute now. All right, so it's going to ask you for your language. I'm going to pick English. Keyboard is fine, and it's basically going to ask you for the Ethernet interface, right? So what do we have? So it's, remember this interface name, it is ENS33 because we'll use this later, and the IP address which I'm going to get is 192.168.0.135. Okay, so I'm going to say okay. And proxy, I don't have a proxy, so I'm going to go with okay. Click on okay again. And for the do I want to use the entire disk, right? So that's a question. Yes, I set up a disk as a LVM group. I don't want that, so I'll uncheck it, and let's come down and we'll say done, right? So that's good, done, and continue, right? And it's gonna ask for the usernames again, so I'm gonna say OpenStack. I'm gonna go with OpenStack again. The server name is also OpenStack. The username is also gonna be OpenStack. Password, I'm gonna pick something which I can remember, right? And let's go. Okay, that's done. Let's say done, and let's enable SSH because we need it. Okay, and the last is done. Okay, it's gonna give you that, so that's fine. Let's go and let's not select anything up there. I'm gonna say done. Alright, so that will take a few minutes. So let me pause the video and come back once the Ubuntu installation is completed. So actually, once it is completed, it will ask me, do I want to reboot? So I'll probably reboot it and then come back with the recording. So I'll pause it till then. Alright, so we've got our Ubuntu machine up and running, right? So what we'll try to do is, let me go down to my terminal. Let's try to SSH, right? So I'm going to say SSH, and the username is OpenStack, right? And the IP address was 135. So there we go. Let's put in the password. And there we go. We are inside. Okay. What do we do now? So a bunch of steps. First things first, right? We need to create a user called as stack, right? So let's do that. So let's probably get into the root. Okay, so once we're in the root, let's actually create a user. So the user is basically called as stack. So I'm going to say add user, and I'm going to say stack. Okay, so when you do that, it's basically going to give you, you'll have to put in a password. So I'm going to put the password. Okay, all of this can be, you can ignore all of that. And I'm going to put yes. Okay, so there you go. The user got created. The next is basically we need to create, we need to make this user as a no password. Basically, it should be passwordless sudo privileges, right? So for that, we have a quick command to do that. So I'm going to just paste the command here. It's very simple, right? So we're going to say echo, the username is stack. I'm going to give it all privileges, and I'm going to say no password, right? I'm going to add that to the sudoers file. Sweet, that's it. So those are the two important things you need to do, right, before you do anything. Okay, next let's look at the networking side of things. So we'll go to ipconfig. Okay, we don't have ipconfig, so let's actually install that. So let's install nettools. Okay, Yeah, there you go. So let's clear the screen a bit. Let's say, sorry, mistake. IP config. Okay, there you go. So ENS33 is our interface, correct? So what we need to do is we need to we currently it is getting it via DHCP, but I would like to use this as a static IP, right? Because this is my home lab and I want my OpenStack to be running on the same IP always, right? So I'll use NetPlan for doing this. There are different ways to do this, but I'm going to use NetPlan because it's a very simple way of doing stuff, right? So what you do is, let's get into the folder called, I think it's in etc and NetPlan, right? So let's get that. Let's see, there'll be a file called, okay, there'll always be a file, a default file, installer file. So let's do a nano on that. Okay, so let's get into the file, and what we'll do is we'll basically add the IP address here. Right? So I'm going to paste it directly from my notes here, but let me actually paste it into a text file first. Okay, so there you go. The indentation is super important here. So you can see the network, the Ethernet. Basically under that you have the interface, which is ENS33, right? And the IP address is going to be, I'm going to change this to 135 because that's the IP. The gateway for my network is 192.168.0.4, 0.1, sorry, and my name servers, the DNS servers is going to be, which is my gateway. As also I'm going to put one more fallback, which is the Google, right? So I can grab this now, and we will have to replace it here, right? So let's do that. A good practice would be to kind of duplicate this file, save it, and then probably do anything. But since it's just a VM, I'm not scared even if it breaks something. Okay, so there you go. Control X on it. The other thing is, let's also put the DNS information in the result.conf, right? So let's do that. So for that, where will that file be? That will be inside etc, and I think inside systemd file, right? So here you have something called result.conf, right? So here let's go and quickly put in the DNS, right? So the DNS is going to be what? So it's going to be 192.168.0.1, and the other one is 8.8.8. Okay, just put a space and separate the two DNS servers, name servers, with a space. Okay, awesome. Control X. Okay, so we have done that. Now to apply this things which you just now did, right, you need to do something called as NetPlan apply, right? NetPlan apply, because we just changed the NetPlan configuration, right? So let's do that. Okay, there you go. The NetPlan configuration went in. If something was wrong, if the indentation was wrong, then when you do NetPlan apply, you get an error, right? So it's a very good tool that way. Let's also kind of restart this whole DNS service, right? So we'll say systemctl restart the system resolved, right? So that way, whatever we did with the DNS configuration is also going to take into effect. The next is, I'll also probably change the time datectl. Basically, I want to set the right time zone, right? Because that's very important if you are doing something with certificates and so on. So I'll go with Asia, and I'm from India, so I'm going to say, I think it's Kolkata, right? Kolkata, correct. Okay, so I think you have a similar command to check. Let me just see if I remember that. I think it's time datectl. If you do list time zone, and then you can probably grep it with whichever continent you are from, right? I am from Asia, so there you go. Okay, list time zone probably doesn't work, is it? Yeah, I think probably, I'm not very sure. I think it's just list maybe. Okay, not sure. Okay, so you can just Google that up. There should be one command to actually list all the time zones. Maybe it is time zones. Let me check that. Nope, I'm not sure. Probably a different command, right? But anyway, if you are from India, then you are good, right? You can use Asia Kolkata, or just figure out what time zone you would need to use, and you will have to just plug it there. So once that is done, probably let's do a quick upgrade, right? We'll do an update and upgrade of the whole Ubuntu before we get to the OpenStack installation. So let's do that. That will take a couple of minutes. So I'm going to come back. All right, so that is done. So now we are good. What we need to do next is let's switch to the user which we just now created. What is the user we created? We created something called stack, right? Yeah, so let's switch to that. Let me clear the screen, right? So I'm right now using the user called as stack. Let's get into the home directory of stack. Okay, there we are. So what do we do next? The next is let's download the DevStack. Now let me show you that. Where is that? Okay, there you go. So that's the DevStack page, and if you go to this one over here, this link, it will redirect to GitHub. Yeah, there you go. So I think the latest one, if you pull right from the from GitHub over here, you would probably get the latest OpenStack version. But if I want an older version, you can just pull that corresponding branch. Now I am looking for something like Victoria, right? The previous one. The latest one I think is Wallaby. So I want Victoria, so I'm going to go with that. So I'm going to pull the branch instead of pulling the latest master repo. Okay. So how do you pull the branch? You're going to say git clone. Give me 1 second. All right. So let's do the git clone, right? So there we go. I'm going to do a git clone. Basically the link which I showed you, but I'm going to pull the branch which is Victoria, right? So that gets cloned now. Okay, it's coming in. Okay, so once we have that, the next is we need a very important file, right? It basically has a bit of configurations, local configurations, right? Which will have some passwords and so on, which are very much needed for the installed script to work, right? So if you go to the folder which got downloaded now, or which got cloned, it's nothing but DevStack, right? And inside this you will find basically the important script, which is your stack.sh, right? So this shell script, when you run, it will install OpenStack. But before running this, we need a file called as Local.conf, right? And if you want to see the sample of that Local.conf, you can get into a folder called samples, right? So let's get into samples, and you will find a file called Local.conf, right? So this is just a sample which you can clone from. So let me show you how it looks. So this is how it looks, right? So this is the file, how it looks, right? Now I think the only requirement probably is providing the passwords, which is probably, I don't know, maybe at the top, I guess. Let me see. Yeah. Sorry, I think I opened the wrong file. My bad. It has to be local.conf. I think I opened the wrong one. So it's I opened the shell script. Okay. So that one, right? The minimum requirement you would need to give the passwords, which is admin password, and then you can just replicate that admin password for all the database password, the rabbit, and the service password. So basically the same password will be used everywhere, right? If you want to do a little more, like for example, if you want to do a little bit of configuration with respect to logging, right? Or if you want to provide the host IP address, right? Like for example, here you see the host IP. I think that also is probably mandatory, right? So you need to provide. So basically what you can do is you can grab this file, right? And you can add your inputs to it, you can edit it, and you will have to place it inside the which folder? In the same folder where DevStack is, basically the DevStack folder, right? PWD. Let me clear the screen a bit. Yeah, you'll have to place it here. So what I'll do is, let me pull down my file so that I mean, not everything which is mentioned here is very much needed. I'm just I'm doing a little bit of extra stuff here because I can use the same stack later to play around with some other, to kind of deploy some applications and so on. But I would say the few things which are needed is, for example, this one, the password section, right? I'm going with something very simple called as pass. You can give any password you want. So the password is important. Probably go and put your IPv4 address as well, right? So so you can see I'm using IPv4, and the host IP in my case is 192.168.0.135, right? And the rest, I'm just going to quickly flash it through the screen like this. But if you want, like for example, floating IP, right, you can give a range. I'm basically using 245 to 254. That's the range, and the gateway is also given here. The public interface, remember I told you to remember the interface name, it is ENS33, so I've used that as well. once you install OpenStack, right, a new network adapter gets created on Ubuntu, and that's basically your VREX, right? And I'll show you that as well. It's basically the physical bridge, and I'll show you that once it comes up. A few simple settings, like for example, Cirrus is a image, a very let's say lightweight image, which you can then use to create instances inside your cloud, right? Because what you're doing right now, you're creating your own OpenStack, which means you would need some images to spin up those instances, right? In your Amazon AWS, you had those AWS AMI image, right? Or Ubuntu or Linux. Similar to that, a very simple, small, lightweight, I think it's like probably less than 20 MB, right? It's a very small operating system which you can use to test your instances. So I'm downloading that as well with the setup, right? So all of this gets done with the script when the script is basically run initially to install the OpenStack, right? So that's my configuration. So what I'm going to do now is, let me just grab all of that, right? And let's copy that. Make sure that it doesn't have any typos and stuff, because if it is, then it's going to fail, right? So I'm going to say local.conf, okay? Nano it and paste it, okay? And exit it, okay? That's it. So that's mainly what you want. Then only next step is to initiate the script. So what I'm going to do is, I don't want to start the script from a remote shell, because if the remote shell closes, then my script will basically stop working. So I'm going to go back to my workstation. I'm going to go to my secure CRT. That way I can log everything happening. So I'll connect to quick connect, and I'm going to do what, 192.168.0.135, correct? Username OpenStack, okay? And let's probably say connect, accept and save. The password is what I think I used. That is correct. Yes, that is correct. And let's clear the screen. Remember, always you need to go to the user called stack, which you just now created, because that is the passwordless I hope that's correct. Yeah, so that's the passwordless sudo, right? It can do any sudo activities without having to put in password. So that's the cool thing about it. Okay, so next let's get to the home directory. Let's clear the screen, and once we're in the home directory, let's get to the DevStack folder. And if everything is good, what should happen? Let's see if the interface is good. Yes, interface is good. So now let's start the script, guys. So I'm going to say /stack.sh. All right, so there you go. Now this will go on for a long time. I think probably around maybe 40-50 minutes or so. But that's mainly, I think if you have done till here, you have done with the major stuff, right? Now let's keep this running as is. Let's not touch it. I'll be back once this is completed. Once this is completed, I'll quickly show you around probably the dev instance which we have set up. Maybe even if time permits, we can even set up a small instance, and I'll show you how you can create an instance in your own cloud, right? Cool. So I'll be back. So we are back. Looks like it's installed, and you should see something like this, right? The final screen should show something like this, and it should also give you the IP address of where your OpenStack got installed, and the services, right? Horizon is also one more services. Basically the GUI which you see, that is nothing but the Horizon service. Basically ties back to what I was telling earlier, right? All these services in OpenStack, they are named in a unique way. Keystone is the other service, so it's basically telling us that, look, this has been installed, and it is giving us that there are two users. One is admin and demo, and both of them have the password called pass, which I set with the local.conf, okay? And we have installed the version called Victoria. So all of that information will be available for you over here, okay? Now before we get into the GUI part, let me do just a couple of small things. Let's actually get into the OpenStack by first. Let's do one thing. So let's actually source the username and the project, which is going to be admin, because we need to clean up the images which are there so that it becomes easier for us in future, right? So let me see if I can do that. Let me just clear the screen a little bit so that you guys can see. Okay, so Let's source. So inside the DevStack inside the DevStack folder, there will be a file called OpenRC. So we are sourcing that, and we are providing the username and the project name as the parameters, right? And you will understand what is this admin and stuff once I show you the GUI. But bear with me for a minute, right? Now I can just run OpenStack image list, right? So this is basically how you can access OpenStack using the CLI, right? So there you go. So it's listing the images. Remember the Ceros image, which I mentioned it explicitly in the local.conf. So that got installed, and it looks like the Fedora has also basically come in as part of the OpenStack image list. Now what I want to do is I don't want such huge names. Rather, I just want to go ahead and rename them. So what I'll do is I'll say, right, okay, OpenStack, and I'm going to say image set. What is the name of this image? This is that Fedora image. So let me grab that, right, and I'm going to rename it to something like simple, which is Fedora, right, instead of having such a huge name. Okay. So that should have changed now. We can just, if you want, you can double check. Let's run the previous command. There you go, right? See, we have renamed that huge image to something like Fedora. So let's do the same thing with the other image as well. All right, so let's do that. Image set. Let's give the name of this huge image over here, right? And let's name this to what? I'm gonna say Ceros. Okay, so because I had to do changes to the OpenStack's image list, that's why I had to log in using the admin project and the admin username, right? Now that that is completed, you guys can quickly see the OpenStack image list looks good, right? So that's all probably from the CLI part. Now I think we are in a good place to go and quickly look at the GUI, right? So once we look at the GUI, we'll just tinker with it a bit and we'll call it a day with this video, okay? So how do you get in? 192.168.0.135, right? That's the IP address of the OpenStack. There you go. That's what you get. Let's log in by what? Let's actually first log in with actually let's log in with the demo user. So OpenStack, like I said, identity is a very important part of OpenStack, right? So you can have different groups of users, basically very similar to your regular cloud deployment, right? You can have users, every user will have a role, like particular user can be a member of a particular project, whereas he can be probably admin of another project, right? So you can have one user working across multiple projects and so on, right? But let me just log in with a username called demo for now, right? Which we saw was already installed, and the username is password is pass. So let's get in there. This is how the default home page looks like, right? And you can see here I've logged in with demo, and on the top you can see the projects, right? We are in the demo project right now. The first thing you would probably do is you would go down to this thing called network, right? Because I think this would again become very clear when you look at this. There you go, right? So what do you see? You see something called as a public network. There is something called as heat net, right? This is mainly for the orchestration part. And then we have something called private, and then you have the shared, okay? I really don't want this heat network, so I'll basically do some changes here and I'll show you how to do that, right? So this is literally the network topology. So all the VMs which you create in your, again, try to always think in terms of your public cloud, right? You always create your VMs in a private VPC over there, right? So this green bar is where you would basically go and connect your VMs generally, right? And then if that VM wants a public internet access, it would basically get it using a router. So what you see here in the center is a router, right? But let's not jump to ahead. Let me do this step by step. First, let's get rid of this heat network. So it comes by default, mainly for some orchestration services to run. What we'll do is we'll probably go to this router. Let's go to probably router details. There you go. It has all the interfaces, right? And the one which I don't want is this one, because this one, if you click on here, you'll see that it is connected to heat network, right? So I'm gonna delete this one. Unable to delete. Okay, so probably let's try that again. Okay, let's go back. If we are not able to do that, we'll probably have to log in with the admin creds to do that. Okay, let's try that again. So let's go to view this thing, and this is the one, the first one. So let's go and Yeah, it's the first one, yes. So let's delete that. Let's see if that works. Okay, there you go, it got deleted. So now we should be back here and we should be able to see, look at this router. It just has now connectivity between the public and the private. So we should be able to delete this heat network now. Let's see if we can do that. I'm going to say delete here, and there you go. There you go, that works, right? So now I can come back to the network topology and we can see that we have cleaned up. We just have the public network and we have the private space, and you can see the IP address subnet also over here, right? It is 10.0.0/26. Looks like this is another network which has been created by default. We don't want that, so we'll sign out quickly out of demo and we'll log in using admin, because it's a shared network, right? Only the admin user can fix that or remove that, edit it, right? Like I said, I mean, OpenStack has different kinds of users, right? This admin user has literally all the privileges. So with this admin user, I can go to network topology, and probably I can click on this guy here, okay? And let's say delete. Hope that works, and that did. All right, so that's good. So what I'm going to quickly do is, we are done. I mean, I don't want to use admin so much, right? This is what you see with admin, right? So you have the admin project, and admin is the guy who probably manages the whole OpenStack, right? I mean, let's say you are setting up OpenStack because you're a cloud vendor, right? You have a bunch of resources and you don't want them to be idle, so you're spinning up a OpenStack. You're basically spinning up your stack, and then you're, let's say, leasing out your cloud resources for other customers, right? So in that case, this admin is basically the role which you should assume, because you are the owner of this whole OpenStack environment. So you would need all the privileges. So admin will be you, right? But at the same time, if you are leasing out your environment to, say, multiple customers, right? So you have customer A, B, C. So in each of that customer, you can again have different kinds of roles. So that you can have something called domains, and you can have a domain admin, and so on. So again, I'm not going to get into too much of OpenStack because that's not the goal of this. So let me sign off of that. Let's get into demo. I'm going to say pass, sign in, don't save. Now it should all look good. So let's get into networking, network topology, and yeah, there you go, right? You have the public and you have the private, and you have the router in the center, and it is telling that there is one interface which is connected, right? So if you now you start spinning up your VMs over here, it will have connectivity to the outside world via this router, okay? That being said, let's play around a bit here. What do we have apart from that? Okay, so this is a very nice way. There's also a graphical way of showing what we are doing, right? So if this is basically, you can say toggle labels, and it's going to show that this is your public, this is your private, and you can see a router is connecting your private network to public network. Okay. Anyway, let's come back here. So what we'll do first is, let's probably try to create a new network, right? Let's create a new network. So we're going to say create network, right? And what do you want to call this? This is, say, something like it could be anything. Let's call it as a database network, right? So generally, what do you have? I mean, imagine you're deploying a normal application, right? You would probably deploy your application on the, you would deploy your instance on the private network, and you would probably want to keep your database separate in a different network, right? So I'm going to call that network as a DB network. It can be anything, any name, right? Should be fine. So I'm going to say DB-network, and I'm going to say next. Subnet. So for this one as well, I'm going to say DB subnet, right? Think of a typical three-tier application, right? You have a front end, you have a front end, you have a logic layer, and then you have the back end, right? So very similar to that. What we are trying to do here is we are first creating a separate network where our database is going to reside. Okay, so we have the DB subnet here. You will have to give some kind of a subnet. So I'm going to say 10.100.100 maybe .0/24, right? A random IP address should be fine. Gateway not needed. Let's say next, and that should do it. I'm going to say create. Okay, in few seconds that should show up. There you go. So we've got, I don't know if you can drag this, probably or not. Okay, but anyway, so I mean, I was hoping this guy to probably show up. Let's see, normal. Okay, so I can't drag it, that's where. Anyway, so basically this orange network is the one which just showed up. I was expecting it to come to the right hand side, but it's just how it showed up. That should be fine. But anyway, so that's all, or you can probably have a look from here as well, right? So this is what you had. I just created a new network called the DB network. Okay, cool. So, but what's the point of just having this, right? The next is we need a router. We'll need a router which will connect this DB network to your private network. Correct? So that right now it is completely isolated. Even if I put my database on this network, it will not have connectivity to whatever else is happening, right? So let's do that. So we'll need a router. So I'm going to go here and say click create a router, and let's call this as the DB router. Technically it is connecting DB and the private subnet, but let's call it as DB router. It's fine, just for example, right? Cool. So we've got that, and what else? So I'm going to say create router. There you go, right? So DB router got created. Again, you can go to this nice view. See, these both are isolated now, right? So what you got to do next is, let's come back to this one, and here you can go to the view router details, and here you have a tab for adding interfaces. Okay, so we'll say add interface, and let's add an interface for what? We will first select probably the DB network, right? And we'll say subnet. So one interface got created. Let's wait, it is getting created. There you go, got created. We can actually go to the topology and see that interface, right? There you go, right? So DB router, the one interface has already been connected. The other interface we want it to be connected to the green network, which is the private network, right? So again, let's come back here. Also observe that the green network is already connected to the other router at the interface 10001, right? So that IP address is already used. So let's see what happens now. Let's come to view router. I'm going to say add another interface, and this time I'm going to select the private, right? The one which is remaining. So when I add this, there you go, we get an error. It's telling that I'm not able to add because the IP address is already being used, 10001, right? So we will have to explicitly provide an IP address. So I'll say private, and this time, to get around that error, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say let's use a different address, 10.0.0 maybe 3, right? Let's do that. So let's say submit. So that should work. Let's wait. Okay, there you go, right? So that came out pretty well. Give me a second. So we've got both the interfaces up. Let's go back to our network topology, and technically everything should be good, right? The diagram looks a little weird because technically if this bar comes to the right, it would be easier to view, but I think it's understood, right? You have the public network here, the router, you're connecting it up to your the private network, and then you have the database network which is also connected to via a router to it, right? So that's how it is. Or if this makes more sense, I think this is also good, right? You've got the public, then you have the private, then we created a new network and we connected it to the private network using a database router. Okay, now what do you do normally in a cloud, right? This is basically the VPC part. We just set up a virtual private network, right? We set up a new network and we basically went and put our database, and we have not put database yet in it. We have just created a network for our database. What we'll do next is we'll launch we'll basically launch an instance, because that's the whole point, right? We would want to create an instance. That's what we do, like a EC2 instance. Let's call this as my instance, maybe, right? Could be anything. So I'm going to go with that name. The availability zone, very much to what we have in your normal cloud, right? You can see here right now we just have one AZ. Again, all of that can be customized, changed. We are just keeping it to default. Source. I don't want a separate new volume to be created. First of all, I'm running low because it's just a VM, so I'm going to say no. Let it not create a new volume in itself. Rather, it's going to use existing volumes. We'll actually create a separate volume later if needed, just to play around. But for now, that's what we are going to do. and we want an image to run on this instance, right? Do you want a Ubuntu? Do you want Red Hat? Whatever. In our case, we are going to run something very small, which is Ceros. That's why we had, downloaded this as along with the Local.conf. You see, it's as small as 12 MB, which is pretty small. Okay. What else? Now let's go to the flavor part. Isn't this very much, like this is pretty straightforward, right? When you look at the flavor, you get the feel of it. This is very similar to how you select in your normal public cloud as well. So in my case, I'm basically going to select something very small, which is M1 tiny, which is just 512 RAM and 1 GB disk. That should be fine. Next, let's go to the networks, right? So in the network, what do I want? I want this instance to be hanging off what? Private, right, network. Because this is the instance, this is like the front end. I think of it as a front end, or maybe, think of it, front end probably, front end instance, right? Which is basically running some code on it, right? So, that should be fine. Give me 1 second. Yeah. So that's basically selected. Again, there's a three-tier architecture, right? So it's a typical web application. What you're going to have, a front end, a back end, and a database, right? In a typical application. So you can think of this as anything. I mean, in the database network, we haven't yet put a database, but what we are doing is right now we are creating an instance and we are putting it in the private network. So maybe you can think of what we are doing right now as the backend, maybe, right? We are just creating an instance for where the backend code is going to run. All right, so we have selected that. What else? Once that is done, I think we are done with all the mandatory selections. We can say launch instance. So we are going to launch that small Linux which is there, the Ceros, right? We are basically going to run that right now. So there you go. You can see it's all coming up. Maybe you can click here and you can see the instances attached to the private network. It's right now in the build stage, so it's not still up. We'll have to wait for a few seconds there you go. Now it is active, right? Which means it is up. So I can, very similar to how you have in AWS, you can click on Open Console and a new window will pop up and there you go. This is your typical machine, right? So let me just log in to this. The user is Ceros and the password is go. Okay, so there you go. That's your Linux shell. I could run some very simple commands, right? I can do something like ls, or what else you want to do. We can probably do IP addresses, right? This is the IP addresses which it has obtained. You can see 10.0.0.29 is what it has obtained. We can see the blocks, right? ls, blk, right? So you see the disks which are attached is also shown. So right now you see there is just what VDA, right? But next what we'll do is we'll actually just come out of that. What we'll do is, right now you just saw that there is just VDA. Let's actually attach a new volume to this. Okay, so let's do that. Before that, let's also go and see the view instance details. Let's see what we can get from that. You can see all the instance information is here. You can see the specs. It was launched on M1.tiny. You have 1 CPU, 1 GB, and so on. Okay. All right, so what else? So now let's go and create we'll create a volume for this guy. Okay, so maybe from here, can we do that? Attach a volume, or maybe do we want to do it from the left side? Maybe we can do it from here. Okay, so let's go to the volumes here. And there you go, you get the option called create a volume. Right now there is no volumes, so I'm gonna create one, right? We could give any name. We can give something called my volume here. Right, and keep everything default. We're gonna use as small as 1 GB as the volume, and let's say create. So once the volume gets created, right now it's all showing no. What you need to do is you need to attach that, so you go to manage attachments and you take that volume, so you need to go and attach it to the instance which you created. So this one, I'm going to say attach. And in few seconds, you should see that particular volume should complete, attaching to the instance, and in the status, it should show up as in use. There you go. Perfect. Looks good. We can also click on the instance here and we can go back to the console, right? This one, right? That's the console. And the same command which I ran earlier, if I run it this time, you can see there's a difference, right? You can see this VDB has come, which is the new volume which we basically attached just now, correct? And a final look at what we did, probably let's come back to, where is that? Network, topology, right? So this is what we have. So this is what we did, right? I just wanted to quickly show you in this video how what OpenStack is. Just give you a quick understanding. Basically, it's the cloud's operating system, right? You want to build your own cloud, that's like your first way. Go and deploy, OpenStack, because it's free, it's out there. There are so many networks running it. There are so many projects worldwide which are using it, right? And very good support community and so on, right? And once we talked a little bit about the introduction, we moved ahead to install DevStack, which is a very simple, very small, very portable way of deploying it as a VM for you to play around, to understand how OpenStack works and so on, right? And then finally, once it all came up, we just played around with the GUI a bit, right? We talked a little bit about the roles. You can see right now in the demo role, but you also have something called the admin, and the admin basically has access to the whole infra, basically like a super user. And everything inside OpenStack is a project, right? Right now you can see we are inside the project called demo. The user is also demo. On the right hand side, project is also demo, right? And you want to create more projects, you can do that as well, right? But that being said, everything inside OpenStack is bound to a project. All these resources are right now bound to the project. If I go to if I had two projects and if I go to the new project, this would not show up, right? Think of one project as a customer, right? Like AWS customer, right? Or if you go to Google Cloud, there literally everything is again called as a project, right? So you can kind of relate to that. So we did that, and then what we did was we kind of played around with the GUI, where we kind of initially deleted some extra junk networks which were there. Then we created our DB network, right? We attached our because we wanted this DB. Let's look at this one. We created our what did we do? We created our DB network, and we did not want it to be isolated, so we created a DB router, attached it to the private network, and then we went and created an instance as well, right? And we created the instance, we saw that it came up, we attached a volume and so on. So we basically did everything we would normally do in a typical AWS public cloud or any other like GCP or Azure and stuff. Okay, hope that's useful, and thanks for watching, guys.